What is up guys, it's Nav here. So after doing nearly 400 solo Vindicta kills on my Ironman, I thought I would put together this video just to sum up my thoughts on this boss and give a few tips to any other Ironman who are looking to kill this boss as well. So what we'll be doing is just going over a replay of a kill I've done, just talking about the fight itself, and then following that we can go into some more in-depth information. So starting the fight, you do want to use Soul Split if you have access to it, otherwise just protect from melee. In phase 1 there's only two mechanics to be aware of. Every third attack, Vindicta will either do a Whirlwind, which is just basically a slightly stronger attack, or she will raise her swords and Gorvek the dragon will fly past, leaving a trail of fire on the ground, which will remain there for some time and do ticking damage for every second you're in it, so it's very urgent you get out of it. But other than that, that's all the mechanics involved for the first phase, which is Vindicta's first 100,000 health. So in terms of the fires left on the ground, they take some time before they actually despawn, and therefore there will be 2 up at a time at points. So keep that in mind and position carefully. So one skill you see me using is Debilitate. It's essentially a threshold which, if it hits the target, it will reduce the damage they do to you for some time, and that duration is longer if you're using a shield. So realistically, if you're in tier 80 or above setups, it's not required for phase 1 because the damage reduction isn't that beneficial and it makes the fighter take longer in general. Now if you do have a lower setup whereby you'll be getting hit more often and using up a lot more food, you may want to use it. So when she transitions into phase 2, Vindicta gets on her dragon and you can see I click away. Now this is actually pretty important. Not doing this can result in the game pathing you into the fire, and that can result in you panicking and dying to the range attack which would soon follow. So here's just a quick example I did find of this happening to me very early on when I started doing Vindicta. So now she's transitioned into phase 2. This phase is a lot slower, and mastering this phase is what will allow you to have much longer lasting trips. Once she's mounted her dragon, she will do 1 melee attack, 1 ranged attack which can hit up to 4,000 damage and is very accurate. To counter this, you want to use Resonance, which is a basic shield ability, which is why you can see I have an offhand defender, and why I prefer dual wielding the whole fight, as it just makes swapping a lot easier. And starting out, if you're uncomfortable with switching items in general, you can just simply leave the offhand on for the entire phase 2, but it's only recommended if it's tier 70 or better. After that ranged attack, she does another melee attack and then flies off to one of the corners of the room, where her dragon, leaving a path of fire that will come at you and works very similar to the fire in phase 1, which you just want to get out of as soon as possible. Essentially, you can avoid the majority of the damage if you try run perpendicular to the boss, as when she flies away, your character will automatically try run to her if you have auto attack on, so try do your best just to click away. Now there's a variety of ways you can deal with every second ranged attack you take. Because of the cooldown on Resonance, there's no way you can have it up in time, and how you deal with it really depends on your gear. If you have very low gear, it's recommended to pray range and use the Devotion ability. This makes your prayers 100% effective for 10 seconds. Doing this is also highly recommended throughout the whole fight if you don't have Soul Split and you're using protection prayers anyway. What I chose to do was either use the Reflect ability with Protect from range, so the damage was still mitigated to an extent, but it also reflected a lot back onto Vindicta. I felt it was a nice mix of playing it safe whilst also still damaging the boss. Other times, if I was on high health, I would simply keep Soul Split on and continue to DPS. Now, I would only recommend such a relaxed approach if you do have tier 80 gear or above. Otherwise, your best bet is to just stick with using Devotion Aura and Resonance. Now, there's another thing that needs to be said about phase 2. Although Vindicta has an obvious rotation, it's time based. Now, what I mean by that is if a certain amount of time passes, she will simply skip an ability. Now, I never went out of my way to test the boundaries of this, but I definitely noticed if you stood back after her fire breath, she would take some time to get to you, and she would often skip her first melee attack and immediately range you. This is just something for people to be aware of, because if you're expecting a melee attack and you haven't used Revenants yet, you could be in for a surprise. One key thing I want to point out is virtually 100% of the time, resonance will come off cooldown the moment it needs to be used again, to the extent where you can almost just queue it up a few seconds before she's even going to use the ranged attack and it'll line up perfectly. Other than that, there isn't much else to it, and also like with all other bosses, remember to try stall any leftover adrenaline you have with combat abilities that don't require a target. Okay, so now the rest of the video I will just be talking about different aspects of the boss in terms of information. So first up, my general gear recommendations. So obviously as an Ironman, use whatever best gear setup you have. I highly recommend melee because Vindicta's attacks are primarily range and melee. If you have better mage gear, that's fine as well, but due to the majority of the incoming damage being predominantly melee attacks, I strongly recommend not using ranged. If for some reason the only decent gear you have is ranged, I can only recommend trying to find another Ironman who can come and tank the boss for you. In terms of specific gear recommendations, it really just comes down to what you want out of the boss. If you want to just be able to scrape by and get 1 kill per trip, you can get away with some pretty low things, such as Lunas, as long as you have a decent weapon like a chaotic staff or a runic staff. Realistically speaking, the lowest gear I do recommend to solo with is tier 70 with a sun spear, runic staff, or chaotic weapon. Such a setup in tier 70 can probably get you between 3 to 4 kills a trip. But again, it also depends on things such as your prayer level and access to turmoil and soul split, and also your herb level, because having overloads makes a massive difference. Now, in terms of summoning familiars, I personally only used a unicorn. The reason for this was I'm only 88 summoning, and the best beast of burden I could use is a war tortoise. And as some of you may be aware, farming tortoise shells is very slow, and it's not very good XP either. And usually when you PVM, you want to kill your beast of burden as soon as it's empty to summon a healing familiar, such as a bunyip, fruit bat, or unicorn. So for this reason, I had a relatively high level setup, and I was just fine with a unicorn. Now, if you're using tier 70 or lower, it's actually highly recommended to bring a war tortoise just because you'll need the extra food because of the extra damage you'll be taking. Next is auras. Now, these are pretty situational to what setup you have. Going into this, I thought Vampirism was going to be the best aura to use, but considering I had a lot of sources of health coming from Soul Split, the Unicorn, and my Bruise, the effect of Vampirism was hardly noticeable. Penance, on the other hand, really made a difference. Using this aura, I could get away with only using 1 to 3 super restores over a whole hour, only requiring them for prayer points if I was extremely lucky in not taking much damage at all over a kill, or if I accidentally left my prayers on after a kill. Although, as a general rule of thumb, in lower gear setups you will get a lot more value out of Vampirism because you will be taking more damage, and the self-healing will mean you can save food and lose less adrenaline eating your own food. The only other 2 auras I feel are worth mentioning are the accuracy auras, being runic accuracy for magic, sharpshooter for ranged, and brawler for melee. These are obviously beneficial, but they only really shine if you're using something around tier 70 or lower and need the accuracy. And the last aura I wanted to highlight, because it actually surprised me in how beneficial it was the Desert Pantheon aura. This aura was available for a limited time by purchasing the 3, 6 or 12 month membership pack in December last year or January this year I believe. Most people will know this aura because it can give XP bonuses for an hour or a pulse score effect, but these aren't available for Ironman, and for this reason I've never really used the aura at all. Now, when my Vamp and Penance aura were down, I actually gave it a go and used it for the Strength of Het perk. Now this increases your max life points by 20% with a maximum benefit of 1000 extra life points. This was surprisingly useful because the healing from unicorns heals you for 10% of your max HP, meaning it healed me for more than usual, and it also meant the extra healing through Soul Split and Bruise wasn't wasted as often. Another thing I wanted to give a quick mention to was the ring slot. When killing Vindicta, I used a Ring of Wealth. Now, it doesn't actually have an influence on the drops, but it just provides decent stats and it's the best ring I currently have. But if you are a pretty high level Ironman and you have access to the Ring of Fortune, that is the Onyx ring and does have an impact on Vindicta's rare drop table, so if you have one, by all means take it. Another important thing I wanted to highlight is the reputation system within God Wars Dungeon 2. Each faction has reputation which can be increased through completing bounties, which can be done daily, or handing in boss tokens that bosses drop when killed to one of the other 3 factions. There are a number of rewards for unlocking levels of reputation, but the main ones of note are the drop chance increases and kill count reduction. At max reputation, you can get up to a 100% increase on the rare drop chances for a boss's rare loot. Pets are not included. And at the 95% mark of having the reputation maxed, you unlock the kill count reduction, meaning you only need 20 kill count to enter a certain boss rather than 40. Both of these make it so even if you aren't ready to start doing God Wars Dungeon 2 yet, I highly recommend you start doing daily bounties, which just involve killing faction followers in the outside areas. But that's pretty much it for this one. If you think I've left something out or are still left with questions unanswered, feel free to leave it in the comments and I'll have that answered for you as soon as possible. Thank you so much for watching and I'll catch you in the next one.